My ML showed up with 50 uninvited guests at our wedding. I forced them all out before dinner. Imagine pouring your heart and soul into planning the most perfect day of your life, meticulously crafting every detail, only for one person to gleefully shatter it into a million pieces. Would you fight back, even if it meant tearing your own family apart? Because that's exactly what happened to me on my wedding day, thanks to my husband's mother, and it almost destroyed everything. My husband, Tom, and I had planned our wedding for over a year. Over a year. We'd saved every single penny, making countless sacrifices to have our dream day at this breathtaking vineyard. We wanted it intimate, just 80 people who truly mattered to us, people who had been there through thick and thin. Every single guest was handpicked. We sent save the dates 8 months out, proper invitations 3 months before. Our guest list was locked down, and the seating chart? Oh, that seating chart took me 2 solid weeks to perfect. From day one, Tom's mother, Louise, was a nightmare. She complained we didn't invite her hairdresser, who she'd known for 20 years. She was furious her neighbors weren't included, even though Tom hadn't seen them since middle school. Can you believe she actually handed us a list of 75 people she wanted to invite? We told her, politely but firmly, no. We gave her and my parents each 10 spots for their absolute must-have family members. Louise used hers on Tom's aunts and uncles. That should have been enough, right? But Louise didn't think rules applied to her. 2 weeks before the wedding, the passive-aggressive comments started. Some people feel hurt about not being invited, she'd sigh. My coworkers are asking about it, and my church friends are so disappointed. We reminded her about the venue's strict capacity limits, how we'd already given final numbers to the caterer. She just sniffed, "You're being selfish. Weddings are about family, not just the couple." Tom, bless his heart, told her to drop it. I thought that was the end of it. I really did. The morning of our wedding, everything was perfect. Absolutely perfect. The vineyard looked incredible, bathed in golden sunlight. The weather was beautiful. I felt like a princess. The ceremony was set for 4 p.m. At 3:30 p.m., cars started pulling up. Lots of cars. Way too many cars. My heart sank into my stomach. A cold dread washed over me as I watched. Louise had invited her entire church congregation, her whole office, her book club, her neighbors, and, I swear, random people she knew from the grocery store. 50 extra people. 50! They showed up with gifts, acting like they belonged there, all dressed up and excited. They were chatting, laughing, talking about how Louise had personally invited them that week, telling them we'd been too busy to send proper invitations but really wanted them there. The venue coordinator, a wonderful woman named Marina, looked absolutely sick. She pulled me aside, her voice tight. "We're violating fire codes with this many people," she whispered. The chairs were already set up for exactly 80 guests. There was nowhere for these extra people to sit. The caterer was panicking because we didn't have food for 130 people. We'd planned a plated dinner with options people had selected months ago. This wasn't some casual buffet. And there was Louise walking around like a queen, greeting everyone, beaming, telling them how happy she was they could make it. She actually told her hairdresser, "Oh, my name specifically asked about you." She told her coworkers Tom had been hoping they'd come. She started seating them in the cocktail hour area, airily saying, "We'll figure it out." Tom was fuming. I could see the rage simmering behind his eyes, but he kept his composure, not wanting to make a scene before our ceremony. His dad, Robert, tried to quietly intervene, but Louise just dissolved into dramatic tears. "You're embarrassing me in front of everyone," she wailed. "Real families welcome everyone with open arms. You're starting your marriage with bad karma by turning away guests." She even accused me of being controlling, saying Tom would never exclude people like this. Marina returned, her face grim. "2 options," she said. "Cancel the ceremony until people leave, or proceed with massive fines for breaking capacity rules. And we'll have to do a buffet-style dinner instead of plated meals, and not everyone will have seats." Our perfect wedding. Ruined. Just like that. Then a thought hit me. A spark. A glint of an idea. I remembered something. Louise had been bragging all week about the mother-son dance. She'd picked a special song, practiced for weeks, bought a specific dress just for that moment. She'd invited all these people partly to show off her big moment. Proceed with the ceremony, I told Marina, my voice surprisingly steady. But only seat our actual invited guests. The extra 50 can stand in the back. Louise loved this. It made her look generous. During cocktail hour, I sought out Jamie. Jamie, Louise's church friend, who Louise herself had described as the biggest gossip in town. I sidled up to her, all sweetness and light. Isn't it just so sweet that Louise invited everyone? I cooed, even though she'll have to pay for all their dinners herself. Jamie looked utterly confused. Pay? Louise told us it was all taken care of. I acted shocked. Oh no. The venue's charging us $125 per extra person. I just assumed Louise was covering her guests, of course. Jamie's face changed immediately. Within 10 minutes, everyone Louise had invited knew they were costing us $6,250. They started approaching Louise, asking if it was true. She tried to laugh it off, but people were mortified. Her coworker, a kind woman, actually handed Tom a check for $125 and apologized for the confusion. Others started to leave, one by one, embarrassed that they'd imposed on our wedding. By dinner time, 40 of the 50 had left. 40. The 10 who stayed spread themselves across the reception hall, sitting awkwardly at tables with our real guests. They picked at their food, avoiding eye contact, their faces red and uncomfortable. Louise, though, she was sitting with 3 women from her book club, laughing too loud, gesturing wildly with her wine glass as if this was the best party she'd ever attended. She kept touching her hair, adjusting her dress, making sure everyone saw her special outfit. Tom squeezed my hand under the table at our sweetheart spot. We tried to smile, to talk to the people who came up to congratulate us, but my eyes kept drifting to those empty chairs. 40 empty chairs where people had been sitting just an hour ago. Part of me felt a fierce pride that I'd gotten rid of them. Another part of me wanted to cry because this wasn't how our wedding was supposed to go. We'd planned every detail for over a year, saved every dollar, and Louise had destroyed it all in one afternoon. The salad course came out and I barely tasted it. My stomach felt tight, angry. Marina found me near the bathroom hallway about 20 minutes into dinner. She pulled me aside, her face worried and tired. She explained that the kitchen was stretching all the food to make it work for the extra people. They were cutting portions, smaller for everyone, so there would be enough to go around. The chicken breast I'd picked out months ago, the one that cost extra because it was organic and special, was now going to be half the size. The vegetables would be smaller, too. Our actual guests, the 80 people we'd carefully chosen and invited properly, were getting less food because of Louise's stunt. Marina apologized 3 times, saying there was nothing else they could do on such short notice. I nodded, told her I understood, but inside I was adding up the cost. We'd paid full price for 80 complete dinners. Now the venue was charging us penalty fees for breaking capacity rules, plus extra for the last-minute service changes. I did the math in my head. $3,000, maybe more. That was 3 months of our savings. Money we'd put aside by skipping movies, eating cheap meals, saying no to everything fun. All gone, because Louise wanted to show off. I walked over to the dessert table, needing a minute away from everyone. Tom's Aunt Rebecca came up beside me, touching my arm. She looked upset, like she'd been holding something in all night and couldn't keep it inside anymore. She whispered, "I'm so sorry about what Louise did." She told me several family members had tried to talk Louise out of inviting extra people weeks ago, but Louise wouldn't listen. Rebecca's voice dropped even lower. Then she said something that made my whole body go cold. This isn't new behavior for Louise. She's been doing stuff like this for years. She'd show up to family barbecues with 6 uninvited friends. She'd volunteer other people's houses for holiday dinners without asking. She'd make big decisions about family events and just expect everyone to go along with it. Rebecca said the family had been giving in to Louise for decades because it was easier than fighting with her. Louise would cry or yell or play the victim until people just let her have her way. I realized Tom had grown up watching this happen his whole life. No wonder he didn't know how to stand up to her. No one in his family ever had. Louise appeared at our sweetheart table halfway through the salad course. Her eyes were red and wet with tears that might have been real or might have been fake. I couldn't tell anymore. She put her hand on the table, leaned toward Tom. She said she was sorry if we were upset, but she just wanted to share our joy with more people. She thought we'd be happy to have extra guests celebrating with us. Family, she insisted, is about opening your heart and including everyone, not being stingy with invitations. Tom's face went hard, in a way I'd never seen before. His voice came out cold and flat. "Leave our table, Mother. We will discuss this later, after the wedding. Go back to your seat now." Louise's mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but something in Tom's expression stopped her. She visibly recoiled. She looked hurt, shocked, like Tom had slapped her. She stepped back from the table, shoulders hunched, and walked back to her book club friends. I watched her sit down, leaning toward the women, her hands moving fast as she talked. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was telling them how mean we were, how we'd embarrassed her, how she was just trying to be nice and we treated her like garbage. She was already rewriting the story, making herself the victim. Robert caught Tom in the hallway outside the reception about 10 minutes later. I saw them through the doorway. Robert's hand was on Tom's shoulder, his mouth moving fast. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could guess. He wanted Tom to let it go, to not make a big deal, to wait until after the honeymoon to talk about it. That's what Robert always did. Smooth things over, keep the peace, pretend nothing bad had happened. But Tom pulled away from his father's hand. His voice got loud enough that I could hear some of the words from inside the reception. He said something about 40 years and enabling. "This is exactly why she thinks it's okay," he raged. Robert's face went pale and surprised, like he'd never heard Tom raise his voice before. Tom kept talking, his hands moving in angry gestures. Robert tried to interrupt, but Tom talked over him. Other guests started looking toward the hallway. I got up and walked over there, not sure if I should interrupt or let them finish. By the time I reached them, Tom was done talking. He walked past his father without another word and came back into the reception. Robert stood in the hallway alone, looking lost and confused, like someone had just told him the sky was green. I watched Louise for the rest of dinner. She barely touched her food, just pushed it around her plate, but she kept getting up, walking to different tables, talking to her friends who'd stayed. Her smile looked forced tight. She'd laughed too loud, then touched someone's arm like they were sharing a special moment. Lissa, one of Jamie's friends from Louise's church, a quiet woman who had tried to leave earlier but Louise had convinced her to stay, came up to me near the end of the main course. Lissa looked uncomfortable as she told me what Louise had been saying all through dinner. Louise was explaining to everyone that we'd overreacted to the situation. She said she was just trying to be inclusive and welcoming. She claimed we were being stingy with the guest list, and she'd wanted to fix that. She never once said she was wrong. Never once admitted she shouldn't have invited people without asking us. Every story she told made her look generous, and us look selfish. Lissa apologized for even mentioning it, but she thought I should know. I thanked her and watched Louise work her way to another table. The truth hit me hard and clear. Louise was never going to take real responsibility. She was never going to understand why it was wrong. In her mind, she was the hero of this story and we were the bad guys. Then the DJ's voice came over the speakers, announcing the mother-son dance. Louise's whole body changed in an instant. Her fake, tired look disappeared, and her face lit up with a huge, real smile. She practically ran to the dance floor, her special dress swishing around her legs. This was her moment. The moment she'd been planning, the reason she'd bought that specific dress, practiced at home, invited all those people. She wanted everyone to see her dance with her son, to watch her be the center of attention, to admire how close they were. Tom walked toward the dance floor slowly, like his feet were made of stone. His shoulders were stiff, his face blank. Not angry, but not happy either. Just empty. The music started, some slow song Louise had picked out weeks ago. She put her hand on Tom's shoulder, smiling up at him like they were the only two people in the room. She kept glancing around at the guests, making sure they were watching. I stood near our table and felt sick. This wasn't about celebrating our marriage. This wasn't about being part of our special day. This was about Louise needing to be important, needing to be seen, needing to control everything around her. She'd invited 50 extra people, just so she'd have a bigger audience for this one dance. Tom barely looked at his mother during the whole song. His eyes stayed focused somewhere over her head, not meeting her gaze when she tried to catch it. He kept his body far away from hers, not close and warm like mothers and sons usually dance. His face stayed cold and polite, like he was dancing with a stranger at a business event. Louise kept trying to pull him closer, to make him smile, but he wouldn't give in. When the song finally ended, Tom stepped back immediately. Louise held her arms out for a hug, her face expecting that big, perfect moment where they'd embrace and everyone would clap. Instead, Tom turned and walked away. He just left her standing there on the dance floor by herself, her arms still out. Her smile crumbled. Her face looked confused, hurt. She dropped her arms slowly, looking around at the guests who were watching. Some people clapped anyway, but it was awkward, quiet. A few people looked away, embarrassed for her. I saw something crack in Louise's performance for just a second. She'd expected Tom to play along like he always had, to give her the perfect moment she wanted. Instead, he'd walked away and left her looking foolish. My maid of honor, Jessica, grabbed my hand and pulled me onto the dance floor. The DJ put on one of our fun songs, something upbeat we'd picked months ago. Jessica spun me around, made silly faces until I started laughing despite everything. My other friends joined us, and soon there was a group of us dancing, being ridiculous together. I felt the tight knot in my chest loosen, just a little. This was why we'd wanted a small wedding in the first place, so we could actually spend time with the people we cared about. Tom came over, put his arms around me from behind, swaying with the music. We danced together with our real friends, the people who'd actually been invited, the people who actually mattered to us. For a few minutes, I almost forgot about Louise, the disaster, and all the money we'd lost. I remembered why we were doing this, why we'd planned this day, why we wanted to get married. But even while I was laughing and dancing, there was a sad feeling underneath everything. Our wedding memories would always include this mess. Every time we looked at our photos or told people about our wedding day, we'd have to explain what Louise did. We'd never get this day back or have a chance to do it over. The reception was winding down when Ellie found me near the gift table. She was one of Louise's coworkers, the nice woman in her 50s who'd handed Tom a check earlier. She pulled me aside privately, her face red with shame. She apologized again and said she needed to explain something. Louise had told all her coworkers that we'd had a family emergency that reduced the guest list at the last minute. She claimed we'd have empty seats and would be thrilled to have them fill those spots. She made it sound like she'd checked with us first, and we'd practically begged her to bring people. Ellie handed me a card with her name on it. "There's a check inside for $250, she whispered, more than double what the meal cost, because I feel so bad about being part of ruining your day. I took the card, told her it wasn't her fault, that Louise had lied to her and everyone else. But inside, I was adding this to the long list of Louise's lies and manipulations. She hadn't just invited people without permission. She'd created an entire fake story to make it seem okay. She'd told different lies to different people to get what she wanted. And she'd done it all without caring about the damage it would cause to us, our wedding, or our relationship with her. I watched Tom try to make conversation with his cousin during dessert, but his smile looked fake and tired. Around 9:30, he found me near the gift table and just said, "We should go." We thanked people quickly, skipping the big goodbye we'd planned with sparklers and photos. Jessica hugged me tight, told me to call her tomorrow. My parents looked worried, but didn't try to stop us. We walked through the vineyard gardens toward the parking lot, where our car was decorated with streamers and cans. The night air felt cool after being inside for hours. Tom walked fast at first, like he was trying to get away from something. Then, about halfway to the car, he just stopped walking. His shoulders started shaking, and he put his hands over his face. I'd never seen him cry like this before, not even at his grandfather's funeral. He kept saying he was sorry, over and over, his voice breaking on every word. I put my arms around him and felt him shake against me. All day, he'd been holding it together, being polite to guests, smiling for photos, dealing with his mother's mess. Now it all came out at once. I held him there in the dark garden, the reception music still playing faintly behind us. Part of me felt sad that our wedding day ended like this, but another part felt something unexpected, a profound sense of unity. We were in this together now, really together, facing his mother's behavior as a team, instead of Tom trying to manage it alone while I watched from the side. This disaster had shown us something important about our marriage before it even really started. We drove to the resort in silence, both too drained to talk much. The honeymoon suite had rose petals on the bed, champagne on ice, all the romantic touches we'd arranged weeks ago. Tom looked at it all and laughed in this bitter way that made my chest hurt. We changed out of our wedding clothes and sat on the bed, still in our fancy underwear, looking at everything we'd planned for this night. I opened the champagne because it seemed wasteful not to. We drank it straight from the bottle, passing it back and forth. Then Tom started talking about his childhood. He told me how Louise used to sign him up for activities without asking, volunteer him for things at school, make decisions about his life, and present them as done deals. He said he learned early that fighting her was exhausting and unusually pointless. It was easier to just go along with what she wanted. He talked until 3 a.m, telling me stories I'd never heard before. Times she showed up at his college dorm unannounced. How she planned his graduation party without consulting him, invited people he barely knew. The way she'd call his professors to discuss his grades. I listened and started seeing patterns I'd missed before. Louise didn't respect boundaries because no one had ever made her face real consequences for crossing them. Robert smoothed things over. Tom gave in. The extended family looked the other way. We made a deal, sitting there in that hotel room. No more giving in to keep the peace. No more pretending her behavior was normal or acceptable. We'd set boundaries together and actually enforce them. Neither of us knew exactly how to do that yet. Tom had spent his whole life avoiding conflict with his mother, but we agreed to figure it out as a team. My phone rang at 8 a.m. the next morning. It was my mom. I almost didn't answer. I was so tired, but she sounded worried when I picked up. She asked how we were doing, if we'd gotten any sleep. Then she said she'd wanted to confront Louise during the reception, but held back because she didn't want to make our day worse than it already was. Her voice got hard when she talked about what Louise did. She called it selfish and cruel, and said any decent mother would be ashamed. Hearing my mom defend us like that made me start crying again. Tom's own parents hadn't called to apologize or check on us. Robert had tried to smooth things over at the wedding, but that was it. No one from Tom's family had reached out to say they were sorry or acknowledge how wrong it was. But my mom? She was ready to go to war for us. She offered to call the venue and talk to them about the penalty fees. She pointed out that we'd solved the capacity problem before dinner service started, so maybe they'd reduce what they were charging us. She said she'd handle it, so we didn't have to deal with more stress. I told her thank you about 10 times. Her support meant everything, especially knowing Tom's parents weren't giving him the same backing. We spent that whole day in bed, talking about what to do next. Our flight to Italy was supposed to leave in 4 days. We had the whole trip planned, hotels booked, train tickets bought. But neither of us could imagine getting on a plane right now, pretending to be happy newlyweds exploring Rome. Tom said he felt sick thinking about trying to act normal and take cute photos when everything felt broken. I agreed. We called the airline and the hotels, pushed everything back by a week. It cost us extra money we didn't really have after the wedding disaster, but we needed time to process what happened before we could move forward. We decided to stay at the resort for 3 more days, just the 2 of us. No schedule, no pressure to be anywhere or do anything. On the 2nd day, Tom called his parents. I listened to him tell Robert that we needed space and wouldn't be taking calls for at least a week. His voice sounded different from usual when he talked to his dad, firmer, less apologetic. Robert tried to argue, but Tom just repeated that we needed space, then ended the call. He looked shaken after, but also kind of proud of himself. The front desk called our room on the 3rd day around 2 p.m. The woman on the phone sounded uncomfortable. She said someone was in the lobby, asking to see us and refusing to leave. I knew immediately. It was Louise. Tom got on the phone and told them we didn't want visitors. The desk woman said she'd already explained that, but the person was insisting it was an emergency. Tom said there was no emergency and asked them to have the person leave the property. We heard shouting in the background through the phone. Tom hung up, and we just looked at each other. 20 minutes later, Robert called. He sounded panicked and exhausted. He said Louise was beside herself with grief, and we were being unfair by shutting her out. She just needed to explain herself, and we'd understand Tom asked if his mom was still at the resort. Robert admitted she was in the parking lot because security had escorted her out of the lobby. Tom said we weren't going to talk to her, and if she didn't leave, we'd call the police ourselves. Robert begged. He used all the same language he'd probably been using for decades. Don't upset your mother. She means well. Family forgives. Just hear her out. Tom ended the call without agreeing to anything. We looked out our window and saw Louise pacing in the parking lot, gesturing wildly while talking on her phone. A security guard stood nearby watching her. She stayed there for another hour before finally driving away. That afternoon, we sat at the little desk in our room with a notebook and started writing. We made a list of everything Louise had done wrong, not just at the wedding, but over the past year of planning. We wrote down why each thing was unacceptable and what the impact had been. Then we outlined exactly what our boundaries would be going forward. She had to acknowledge what she did was wrong without making excuses or justifications. She had to agree to respect our decisions about our own lives. She had to understand that breaking these boundaries would mean we'd reduce contact with her. We spent hours on this letter, going over every word to make sure it was clear and firm. Tom kept wanting to soften the language or add explanations. I had to remind him that explaining was what he'd been doing his whole life, and it never worked. This letter wasn't about helping Louise understand. It was about telling her how things were going to be from now on. We finally finished it around 6 p.m. that evening. Tom read it out loud, and his voice cracked a few times. This letter represented something huge for him. He was choosing his marriage over his mother's feelings. He was setting boundaries his father had never set. He was breaking patterns that had existed in his family for decades. We printed it at the resort's business center and mailed it that night. 2 weeks later, we finally left for Italy. We'd spent the time in between at home, trying to get back to normal life while processing everything. The trip felt different from what we'd imagined. We had amazing moments. Walking through Rome, eating pasta in tiny restaurants, seeing the Colosseum and the Vatican. But every conversation seemed to circle back to the wedding and Louise and what our relationship with Tom's parents would look like now. I'd catch Tom staring out the window of our train to Florence with this sad look on his face. I knew he was thinking about his family. He'd grown up believing he had this close, loving relationship with his parents. Now he was seeing it differently, seeing how much of that closeness had been built on him giving in to what Louise wanted. How his dad enabled her behavior instead of standing up to it. We were in Florence when Robert called. Tom almost didn't answer, but I told him he should. Robert said Louise had read our letter multiple times and was ready to apologize properly when we got home. She'd agreed to all our terms and wanted to make things right. Tom asked if she really meant it, or if Dad had pressured her into it. Robert swore she was sincere. Tom looked at me while he was on the phone, and I could see the hope and doubt fighting in his face. He wanted to believe his mother could change, but he'd seen her manipulate and lie too many times to fully trust it. We agreed to meet with them a week after we got back. We wanted time to settle into our apartment and prepare ourselves before facing Louise again. The meeting happened at a coffee shop halfway between our apartment and their house. Neutral territory. Louise and Robert were already there when we arrived, sitting at a corner table. Louise had papers in front of her. She didn't make eye contact when we sat down. She picked up the papers and started reading. It was clearly something she'd written and practiced. She said she understood she'd been wrong to invite people without our permission. She acknowledged it had caused us financial damage and emotional pain. She promised to respect our boundaries going forward and said she wanted to rebuild trust with us. All the words were right. Everything we'd asked for in our letter was there in her statement, but her voice was flat and resentful. Her jaw was tight. She gripped the papers so hard they wrinkled. When she finished reading, she finally looked up at Tom, not at me. Her eyes were hard. This wasn't a genuine apology. This was something Robert had made her do. Tom thanked her for the apology and said we appreciated her willingness to work on our relationship. I stayed quiet. I didn't believe a word of what she'd said. But Tom needed to believe progress was possible. He needed to think his mother could change. So I let him accept her fake apology and pretended I believed it, too. The next 2 months were like a test. Louise mostly followed the boundaries we'd set. She called before coming over instead of just showing up. She didn't volunteer us for family events without asking first. She stopped making comments about our decisions. But there were small violations that showed she hadn't really changed. She came to our apartment one Saturday morning without calling first, claiming she'd been in the neighborhood and thought she'd stop by. Tom reminded her of our boundary, and she left, annoyed. Another time, Tom didn't answer his cell for a few hours because he was in a meeting. She called his office directly and told his assistant it was urgent. It wasn't urgent. She just wanted to ask him something about Robert's birthday party. Tom called her back and told her that wasn't acceptable. She apologized, but I could hear the irritation in her voice through the phone. We also started hearing from Tom's aunt and uncle that Louise was making comments at family gatherings, saying we'd become distant, suggesting I was controlling Tom, painting herself as the victim who was trying so hard, but her son had changed. Every violation meant a consequence, like we'd outlined. When she showed up unannounced, we canceled the next planned dinner with her. When she called his work, Tom didn't take her calls for 3 days. When we heard about the comments to family, Tom sent her a text reminding her of our boundaries. It was exhausting. Every interaction felt like we had to be on guard. But it was also necessary. We were training her that our boundaries were real and breaking them had costs. Over the next few months, Tom's relationship with Louise changed into something I barely recognized. He still called her every week, but the conversations got shorter and stayed on the surface. She'd ask about his work, and he'd give basic answers without details. She'd suggest dinner plans, and he'd check with me first, then tell her which dates worked instead of just agreeing. When she tried her usual tricks, like mentioning something she needed help with or bringing up family obligations, he'd redirect the conversation or say he had to go. I watched him practice these boundaries in real time, his voice staying calm but firm when she pushed. He saw his parents every few weeks instead of the weekly dinners they used to have. The visits were shorter, too, maybe 2 hours instead of whole afternoons. He stopped sharing personal things with Louise, keeping our marriage and our plans private. When she asked pointed questions about our lives, he gave vague answers that didn't give her ammunition. I could see it hurt him. Sometimes after he hung up the phone with her, he'd sit quietly for a while looking sad. Other times he'd talk about memories from childhood, stories about Louise being a good mom when he was little, and I'd hear him trying to match those memories with the woman who sabotaged our wedding. He was grieving something real, the close relationship he thought they had. But he was also getting healthier, making decisions without worrying about her reaction first, building a life that belonged to us instead of constantly managing her feelings. 6 months after the wedding, a big box arrived at our apartment. The professional photos. I'd been dreading this moment since we got back from Italy. Tom opened the box in our living room, and we spread the photos across the coffee table. The disaster was right there in every wide shot. You could see the stress on our faces during the ceremony. Those tight smiles that didn't reach our eyes. The reception photos showed empty chairs where 40 people had fled. Those gaps in the carefully arranged tables that made the whole room look wrong. Louise appeared in dozens of shots during the early reception, her expressions smug and satisfied, like she'd won something. There were photos of her greeting her uninvited guests, her face glowing with importance. Pictures of her during dinner before people started leaving, holding court at her table while Tom and I looked miserable at ours. I felt sick looking at them, remembering how perfect that day was supposed to be. But then Tom found different photos mixed in with the disaster shots. Us laughing during our first dance. Both of us with genuine smiles, caught up in the moment despite everything. A shot of me with Jessica and my other bridesmaids. All of us cracking up about something during the reception. Photos of Tom's face when he first saw me walking down the aisle. This look of pure love that made my chest tight. A beautiful image of us holding each other during our last dance. The one we'd requested at the end of the night when most guests had left. Just us, swaying together in the dim lights. We sat on the floor, going through every photo twice, sorting them into 2 piles. The disaster evidence went into one stack. The genuine moments went into another. The genuine pile was smaller, maybe 30 photos out of 200. But those 30 captured something real, moments when we forgot about Louise and just loved each other. We decided to order prints of only those 30. We wouldn't display any photos that showed the stress or the empty chairs or Louise's smug face. We'd focus on what mattered, the fact that we got married and had moments of real joy despite her sabotage. Tom said we should let go of the perfect wedding we'd imagined and accept the imperfect one we actually had. It wasn't easy, looking at proof of how much Louise had ruined, but choosing which memories to keep helped somehow. My relationship with Louise stayed polite but distant after that. I saw her at family events and was cordial, making small talk about neutral topics, then moving on to talk to other people. I never sought her out for private conversations or tried to build a closer relationship. She noticed. She started making attempts to win me over, showing up at family dinners with little gifts for me, things she claimed made her think of me. A scented candle, a cookbook she said matched my taste, a scarf in a color she thought I'd like. I accepted them politely and thanked her, but I saw through it. These weren't genuine gestures of connection. They were manipulation tactics, ways to make me feel obligated to her or to position herself as a thoughtful mother-in-law in front of other family members. She'd also compliment me in front of others, saying things about my outfit or my cooking or something I'd accomplished at work. The compliments always felt calculated, like she was performing for an audience rather than actually appreciating me. I recognized these patterns from watching her manipulate Tom for years. When we were alone, she'd sometimes try a different approach, acting vulnerable and suggesting we should talk more or spend time together. I'd respond vaguely, saying I was busy with work or other commitments, never committing to anything specific. Tom supported my distance completely. He never pressured me to have a closer relationship with his mother or suggested I should forgive her more fully. He understood that I didn't owe Louise anything after what she'd done, that maintaining boundaries wasn't mean or petty, but healthy and necessary. When his dad occasionally hinted that I should make more effort with Louise, Tom shut it down immediately, saying I had every right to maintain whatever level of contact felt comfortable for me. A year after the wedding, Tom and I were sitting in our favorite coffee shop on a Sunday morning, the kind of lazy weekend routine we'd built together. We'd just come from brunch with my parents, who were visiting from out of town. My mom had been asking about our anniversary plans, and we'd realized we were genuinely excited to celebrate, not dreading it or feeling sad about the wedding disaster. Tom said something that stuck with me. He pointed out that several of our friends who'd had perfect wedding days were already struggling in their marriages, fighting about money or in-laws or basic compatibility issues they hadn't worked through before getting married. Meanwhile, we were solid. The wedding disaster had forced us to communicate clearly from day one, to set boundaries together, to prioritize our marriage over family pressure. We'd learned how to be partners who faced hard things together instead of avoiding conflict or hoping problems would solve themselves. Louise had actually given us something valuable by being so terrible, though I'd never thank her for it. We knew how to stand united against outside pressure. We knew how to enforce boundaries, even when it was uncomfortable. We knew our marriage came first before parents or extended family or anyone else's expectations. Louise mostly respected our boundaries now, though we both understood she hadn't fundamentally changed. She still made occasional comments to family members about us being distant. She still tried small manipulations, testing whether we'd notice or care. But we stayed alert, catching the attempts and shutting them down quickly. We'd learned to be vigilant without being paranoid, to trust our instincts about her behavior without obsessing over every interaction. Our wedding wasn't the fairy tale we'd planned and saved for. The photos we displayed showed a smaller, more intimate celebration than we'd imagined. But that day had taught us how to be partners in a way a perfect party never could have. We'd faced a crisis together, made hard decisions together, and come out stronger. That foundation made our marriage solid in ways that mattered more than any beautiful venue or flawless timeline ever could. Have you ever had to deal with a nightmare mother-in-law or family member who tried to hijack your big day? Or have you learned a tough lesson about boundaries that ultimately made your relationship stronger? Tell me your stories in the comments below. I really want to hear them.